Well, hello everyone and welcome. My name's Jeremy Leffler and I work in the policy office at the National Science Foundation, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today to our final week of the NSF Virtual Grants Conference. Before we begin, we'd like to take a quick poll to find out a little bit more about you. If you're using Zoom from a desktop browser, you may not be able to access the poll. For best results, we want to make sure that you're viewing the presentation from the Zoom application. So if you attended our first week of the Grants Conference, you know that this virtual conference is taking place over 2 weeks with 2 sessions per day. And the content for this webinar series is similar to what it would be for an in-person grants conference. All of the sessions that you've been seeing have been pre-recorded. However, we will be taking live Q&A. For information about the sessions, presentations, and our speakers, please visit the conference website. If you have questions during the presentation, please submit them using the Q&A function in Zoom. We are encouraging attendees to upvote questions. To upvote a question, simply navigate to the Q&A function and click on the thumbs up button, and this will bring the most popular questions to the top of the Q&A window. We are answering your questions as they come in, and we'll continue to answer questions live at the conclusion of the presentation. Please keep in mind we do have quite a number of participants for these sessions, so we may not be able to get to all of your questions. We are also recording this session, and it will be made available on our website at nsfpolicyoutreach.com in the coming weeks, and we'll send an email announcement as soon as those sessions have been posted. If you have any technical difficulties during the presentation, please use the Q&A and someone will be able to assist you. Thank you for participating in the poll. We're happy and excited that you can join us as this marks our first ever virtual grants conference. We've been doing these for a long time at NSF, and they started small way back in 1993. They grew over the years to be 2 full days in person and now a 2-week-long virtual event. I also want to remind you to please be on the lookout for some survey emails so that you can provide feedback to us on how this has been going. We hope that you'll enjoy the conference and all of the sessions that you choose to attend. So I'm now pleased to present this session about the role of the NSF Office of the Inspector General. And this session will be covered by Sonia Khanzode, who is an investigative attorney, and Jeanette, Hyatt, who is an auditor, both of whom work in the Office of the Inspector General.
Hello, and welcome to the portion on the Office of Inspector General for the Fall 2020 NSF Grants Conference. My name is Jeanette Hyatt, and I am with the Office of Audits.
And I'm Sonia Khanzode. I'm an investigative attorney in the Office of Investigations.
Next slide, please. So this slide shows the main functions of the Office of Inspector General. Sonia will be discussing the Office of Investigations, and I will be discussing the Office of Audits. My discussion will focus primarily on single audit reviews or quality assurance reviews and the external audit process, as those are the functions that will most impact NSF award recipients such as yourselves. The Office of Inspector General also performs outreach functions and briefings such as this one. Next slide, please. The annual audit work plan for the Office of Audit addresses several areas such as legislative requirements, congressional requests, and NSF or NSB suggestions. It also includes discretionary audits developed internally from risk assessments. These risk assessments are the primary basis for the audit selection for the external audit reviews and for the single audit reviews. Next slide, please. So now I am going to discuss the typical audits that you may participate in for an external audit or a single audit review. As of October 2020, the Office of Inspector General has 25 external audits in process. This includes 20 audits that are being performed by independent public accounting firms or IPAs, and 5 audits that are being performed internally by the OIG staff. The external audits are not just limited to a review of incurred costs on a single NSF award, but instead the auditors will be reviewing all costs claimed on NSF awards during a specific time period. The auditors will assess risks across the institution based on data analytics of the general ledger transactions. A typical external audit will review financial systems and expenditure data and compare NSF drawdowns to those accounting systems. The OIG also conducts quality assurance reviews on 8 NSF cognizant auditees or auditees that spend $50 million or more of federal expenditures in a year, and approximately 75 NSF oversight auditees, which spend less than $50 million. Quality assurance work consists of both desk reviews and quality control reviews. The desk reviews verify that the single audit information is presented in accordance with uniform guidance and auditing standards. The quality control reviews verify that the underlying audit work was performed in accordance with these standards as well. We use checklists developed by the Council of Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency to conduct our reviews. And I would like to note here that while this is a review of the auditor's work, it may also include a review of the source documentation that was provided during the original audit testing. Our quality assurance work helps to ensure that the information provided in the single audit reports can be relied on by government agencies and pass-through entities as part of their awardee monitoring process. Next slide, please. The external risk model that we use focuses our responsibilities and helps us to select institutions that we will visit for external audits each year. We consider internal factors such as drawdown patterns and the number and value of NSF awards. We also look at external information such as single audit data and IRS information to determine risk factors. We put all this information together to determine the level of risk at each institution and make our selection for external audits. Next slide, please. The single audit review selection process begins with about 35,000 single audits, which encompasses about $7 billion in NSF annual expenditures. Of those 35,000 audits, about 85 fall under NSF cognizant or oversight responsibility and may be selected for a QCR. So desk reviews are performed on all 85 audits, and then about 2 or 3 of the audits are selected each year for a QCR. Factors considered when selecting our quality control reviews are results of desk reviews and previous QCRs, characteristics of the auditor or auditing firm, such as the volume and exposure of NSF expenditures, as well as the portion of low risk or no finding auditees, and whether the auditor is a member of the Government Audit Quality Center, which is an organization that works to improve the standards for single audit reporting. Next slide, please. So now I will be discussing the audit communications process in relation to both external audits and quality assurance reviews. The external audit process takes about a year from the engagement letter to the issuance of the final report. The Office of Inspector General will initiate the audit with the engagement letter and a discussion with the auditee during the entrance conference. The fieldwork results are then summarized in the fieldwork discussion draft to discuss any potential findings and recommendations. Alternatively, the audit team may choose to use NPFRs, which are notice of potential findings and recommendations during the fieldwork process to communicate the results of the fieldwork testing. After the discussion of fieldwork, the Office of Inspector General will issue an official draft report to the auditee. The auditee then has 30 days to respond to the draft report. The auditee's response will be included in the final report in its entirety. A quality assurance review usually takes 2 weeks of on-site work. Our goal is a 3-month review process from the start of the on-site work to the completion of the final report. The final reports and letters are provided to awardees, auditors, federal funding agencies, and when applicable, pass-through entities for their information. So the main differences to note here is that during step 5, the auditee is usually only given only needs about a 2-week response period instead of a 30-day response period due to the shorter length of the report. Also, the involvement of the NSF award recipient is usually limited to step 1 and step 6, as they will be receiving a copy of the engagement letter and the final report. Also, during field work, which occurs between steps 2 and 3, the recipient may be contacted to provide the audit source documentation as previously discussed. However, the award recipient is generally not involved in the discussion of field work or the official draft reporting process. Sonia will now discuss the Office of Investigations.
Thank you, Jeanette. As Jeanette mentioned previously, I work for the investigations arm of NSF OIG, and we are a fairly small operation with about 26 staff, including the investigative scientists, the federal agents, and the investigative attorneys like myself. So our primary mission is to detect fraud, waste, and abuse where NSF funding is involved. We assess alleged wrongdoing in things like NSF proposals, awards, programs, and we determine if there are any civil, criminal, or administrative matters that need to be resolved. So we can go to the next slide. So in this slide, we know what type of allegations come across our desk. Our cases involve a variety of allegations, which include the items on this slide, such as false statements or theft of government funds. We also investigate allegations of research misconduct, which you can see in the top hexagon on this slide, such as plagiarism and intellectual theft and falsification, fabrication of data. So these types of allegations are primarily handled by the investigative scientists in our office. And as I mentioned earlier, we pretty much look into anything that involves NSF funds or those who work or do business with NSF. Work for or do business with NSF. Later on in this presentation, I'll go over a few case studies with some interesting examples showcasing some of these allegations. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned earlier, we're a fairly small office, so we can't catch everything ourselves. We often rely on allegations from a variety of sources. This slide lists some common sources of allegations, and I won't read all of them, but I'd like to highlight that we sometimes get allegations directly from PIs and co-PIs, as well as other individuals that are working on an award, like a contractor or a student or a postdoc. NSF program officers also might come across something in an award that they are managing or a proposal that they are reviewing and refer that matter to us. And of course, anybody can contact our anonymous hotline and provide us with an allegation that way. The last slide of our presentation will have a phone number and an email address if you wanted to make an allegation that way. We just ask that you give us as much information as possible when providing an anonymous allegation. It's really hard for us to look into something that just says fraud is happening at my university. So next slide, please. So next up is a general overview of our investigative process. One disclaimer I just want to make is we might not do everything in this exact order, and we might not pursue all of these steps on any given case. But I think that this graphic gives you a really good general sense of what happens when we get an allegation and how we try and reach its resolution. So first, an allegation will come into our office, and we're going to review it and determine whether it has merits and whether we actually have the jurisdiction to investigate. Because if there's no nexus to NSF, then we don't have the authority to look into it. After that, we enter our fact-finding stage, and this is where we objectively gather evidence. There isn't one specific way we go about doing this, but oftentimes we'll issue an OIG subpoena to gather records. We'll conduct interviews with relevant persons and review the proposals and awards that are involved. And I want to point out that throughout this process, we are objective fact finders. We at OIG don't make the ultimate decisions on what happens in our cases. We generally find the facts and communicate that to the decider, who might be NSF, a federal prosecutor, or sometimes other decision makers. So after we feel like we have enough information, we might make a referral to audit or another OIG, which is step 3. And if we feel that that group is better suited to resolve the issues found, we're going to make our recommendation that they look into it. If we are working with research misconduct, we're going to summarize our findings into a report, and that's step 4. And then the very final step that we'll take is working with DOJ or state prosecutors and NSF itself to develop appropriate resolutions. So we can go to slide 12. All right, so many of the cases we work on are administrative cases, such as our research misconduct cases. We follow NSF's regulation on research misconduct, which delegates investigative authority to our office. There needs to be a nexus in the research misconduct to NSF in order for us to have jurisdiction to investigate. The regulation also provides definitions of research misconduct, of research, as well as fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism. If you're interested in the specifics of those definitions, you can look up the reg at 45 CFR part 689. Additionally, our admin cases include conflict of interest issues, violations of peer review confidentiality, human subject research, and whistleblower retaliation cases. Next slide. So these are a few frequently violated statutes that we see in our cases. Wire fraud and mail fraud can be charged in our cases if someone submits a false information to obtain an NSF award. Theft of federal funds, which is 18 U.S.C. 666, can be charged if you are awarded an NSF grant, but then decide to spend that money on, maybe a personal yoga retreat to Australia, instead of on what the proposal was actually funded for. So the bottom line is don't lie, cheat, or steal when obtaining federal funds. We also have many cases involving civil false claims under 31 U.S.C. 3729. And that's where you submit a false documentation, we can seek out penalties and damages for each false claim submitted. So next slide. So what are some of the outcomes for people that do lie, cheat, or steal? We can refer our cases to other places like DOJ, where depending on whether it's a civil or criminal violation, we might end up with a case going to trial. We might end up with a case going to trial, settlement agreements, or compliance agreements. Sometimes fines are involved. Money can be returned to NSF, and in some instances, there might even be jail time. For our administrative matters, we might refer those to NSF, and those might end up in a suspension or termination of an award. It might require the researcher to submit certifications, retractions of a paper or a journal could happen, and even suspension or debarment from receiving federal funds for a specific period of time, usually up to 3 years, but we have seen some instances where it has been as high as 10 years. And then lastly, we, of course, will always refer back to our audits side of things if we feel that a specific matter is better suited for them. Next slide. So now I'm going to discuss a few hopefully interesting cases. In this slide here, we have case study 1, which involves a university which was audited by a CPA firm hired by our office. Auditors identified salary transactions with insufficient or no supporting documentation. Later, they found out that the research compliance coordinator of the university, I guess while she was preparing for the audit, noticed that some documents were missing. And then she directed PIs from the university to submit backdated personnel activity reports based on salary amounts that had been paid. And sometimes those forms were backdated, sometimes the signatures were omitted, and the coordinator would fill them in herself. Sometimes she would correct, numbers changing 9 to 8. Sometimes the research coordinator would use previously completed forms or personnel activity reports, and then she would copy them and use whiteout and write in different dates. So ultimately, this case was referred to a civil prosecutor, and it ended up in approximately a $1.17 million settlement. And that was reached with the university, and the university was placed on a 5-year compliance plan. And then the research coordinator was charged with a misdemeanor, not a felony, because in this situation, she didn't personally benefit from the scheme, but had she somehow personally benefited, then it might have been a felony charge instead for her. So pretty interesting case study, I think, where maybe she thought she was doing the right thing in the beginning to, get the auditors the documents they wanted, but ultimately it didn't work out so great. So we can move on to another example in slide 16. So here, a university had a pattern and a practice of paying its graduate students to perform unrelated, like PhD teaching assistant duties from federal research grants. And because the teaching assistant duties were unallocable, meaning they weren't for the specific awards that they were charged to, they were unallowable for under the federal grant requirements. So in order to fix the situation, the university ultimately set up a teaching assistant fund. So they set up the separate fund that essentially allowed those students to be paid from that fund instead of from the awards that they were previously being paid for. And this case was brought to U.S. Attorney's Office, and it was accepted for civil prosecution. And because this had been going on for such a long time, there was a lot of money at issue, and ultimately a settlement was reached totaling $3.75 million. And because the university had violated the Civil False Claims Act, part of that $3.75 million included some fines and damages, or penalties, I mean. So we can go to the next slide. So here in case study number 3, we shift gears a bit from university awards, from awards made to a university to awards made to a small business concern, which received NSF and SBIR, STTR funds under the SBIR STTR program. So this case took many years in our office and it's fairly complex. So I'm not going to go into every detail, but in a nutshell, the founder of this small business was a former university professor who submitted false information in his proposals to NSF. He had undisclosed foreign funding, and then he submitted proposals for research that had already been completed. Obviously a big no-no. NSF is not going to double fund the exact same research. And then on top of everything, when he was confronted by federal investigators, the professor submitted false timesheets. So eventually this case ended up going to trial, and the individual was convicted of conspiracy, false statements, and obstruction. The obstruction charge was because of the false documents during an investigation. Next slide. All right, up next, we have another case involving a university which had multiple NSF awards for high energy particle physics research. For almost 9 years, the university failed to maintain appropriate documentation for expenses and would approve and disperse advances and other payments of NSF award funds without proper justification or the requisite verification. These expenses included things like salary, equipment, and travel. Additionally, the university found that these significant problems, including some personal expenses from the PI that were paid with NSF funds, but they failed to notify NSF for a long time. I think it was almost 2 years. And federal government grant regulations require that universities exercise control and oversight over the NSF award funds they receive. Among other things, a recipient of NSF award funds must have documentation of salary payments, of purchase equipment, of travel, of jet expenses, and all other items charged to the awards. The regulations also limit cash advances to the recipient's immediate cash needs. Additionally, the regulations require that universities notify NSF of any significant problems relating to the financial management of the awards. So eventually the university notified NSF, and it ultimately led to a $2.7 million settlement and a 5-year compliance plan. Next slide. So time for our last case study, which involves our administrative research misconduct cases. And here there was an NSF-supported graduate student who falsified data and plagiarized another researcher's dissertation, and then committed ethical violations when preparing and submitting a manuscript, which ultimately ended up being published by 2 journals. Specifically, he submitted manuscripts without his co-author's knowledge and consent. He submitted manuscripts to 7 journals simultaneously, and then he falsified the journal submission page and used false email addresses for co-authors. And ultimately, the university investigated the matter and dismissed the student and had the publications retracted. And then in order to prevent something like that from happening again, they required better student training going forward. And our office recommended that the student be debarred for 3 years and that he must provide certifications and assurances for 6 years if he were to get NSF funding in the future. And so if you find these case studies interesting that I just talked about, you can visit our website and read our semi-annual report for many more examples of the work that we do. Next slide. So what's the bottom line for sharing with you all of these examples of casework that our office does? Well, we have this handy slide of some of best practices that should keep us from hopefully knocking on your door. Whether you're a university, an individual, PI, or you have a small business that's hoping to get NSF funds, read and know the grant conditions and the rules that apply. Every award that is made by NSF comes with a grant letter that references the rules and regulations. So make sure that you and your staff is familiar with them. If your university or your company doesn't already have training in place, we recommend creating training for anyone that handles federal awards. And that would include PIs, administrative staff, financial staff, basically anybody that might be doing something related to the award. They should have some training and be familiar with how the rules and regulations work. The other thing that we think is one of our best practices is that make sure you maintain proper documentation to support all your award expenditures. Do not create documents after the fact. You will get caught and you will not like the consequences. And in line with that, don't spend award funds once an award has expired, and don't use funds for non-award related purposes. It seems simple enough, but we see it many times. People think, well, there are leftover funds on my award, so I might as well spend them on, 20 new iPads, even though the award has already ended. And that's actually a true story. It happened in one of my cases. I don't remember how many iPads, but the award had ended and they were just trying to spend down the funds. So another best practice is, don't provide inaccurate information or false certifications to either your grantee institution or directly to the federal agency. If you know that funds were misspent, don't certify that they were spent correctly. If you know that there's something inaccurate in your proposal, don't submit that proposal to NSF hoping to get funds. Again, you're going to get caught, and you're not going to like the consequences if you do. And I like this last one. When in doubt, ask your NSF program officer. NSF has highly trained and specialized staff that know what they're doing. So if you run into an issue, get their advice in writing and follow it. Next slide. Before we wrap up, there's one final piece that is important to OIG, and that is whistleblower protections. This is a core value of OIG, protecting NSF employees, contractors, award recipients, or subrecipients who step forward and make a protected disclosure by identifying potential wrongdoing in regards to federal funds is very important to us. And federal law prohibits retaliation against an individual who makes a protected disclosure. And a protected disclosure is defined as information that is reasonably believed to evidence a violation of law, rule, or regulation, gross management, gross waste of funds, abuse of authority, or a substantial and specific danger to public health. So on the left side of the slide, you can see the types of employees that are protected if they make a protected disclosure. And this would include current and former NSF employees, applicants for NSF employment, employees of a federal contractor or subcontractor who is receiving NSF funds, or employees of a grantee or a sub-grantee. So if you want to make a protected disclosure, you can make it to your supervisor, your management, directly to OIG or Congress, and you can find additional information at the link at the bottom of the slide. We also have an ombudsman in OIG who you can speak with, and his email and contact information is on the next slide. Next slide. And lastly, we can go to the next slide. And so here's our last slide with all the contact information we promised to provide you with. You can email us, you can call us, you can fax us. We're very accessible. Please note that we have our anonymous hotline number listed here. And don't forget to check us out on Twitter or at our website. And now we can take any questions if there are any.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to welcome back Sonia and Jeanette. We've got a few questions. I would encourage everybody who's watching, if you do have a question, please submit it now, and we'll cover the questions that we have and any more that come in. But I'll start off just by going down the list and ones that people have upvoted. Can you recommend training for smaller first-time nonprofits that are not part of a university? Are there any resources that you can recommend?
I think, so that's a pretty good question. I don't, off the top of my head, know of specific trainings, but I do know if you go to our website, we have a conferences and outreach section. I'm just looking at that right now, actually. And I think, we do these types of conferences throughout the year. We also have like different brochures in there that might be able to provide you with some insight.
And somebody has written in the National Grants Management Association.
Okay, yeah.
I'll go to the next question. What does the investigation and appeal process look like for these cases? Do they start with a complaint or a report? Does it take months to complete? Are there appeals? What kind of criteria govern the process? So a few questions about the investigation and appeal process.
Right. So I believe we had a slide that kind of briefly highlighted the investigative process. Generally speaking, we're either going to get, we're going to start an investigation based on a complaint that might come into the office. But we also do, we call them proactive reviews, where we might look at a subset of specific type of award and then try to identify risks and red flags, and we might go from there. Once we begin investigating, it does take a long time. I actually just had a case that that has been open since 2012 in our office. I had been working on it since 2013, and we only just had the sentencing hearing this past week. So it can take 3, 4, 5, 6 years sometimes to investigate a particular matter. And a lot of it depends too. So, while we're investigating, initially we're basically independent fact finders, right? We're going to go out and gather as much information and documentation that we can find, and at that point, then we're going to make a decision to either refer that to DOJ or to maybe other parties that might be able to take additional steps. But if we do take this matter to refer to DOJ, I mean, that opens a whole new, I guess, chain of events, because now you're working with prosecutors. That process can take a long time. Oftentimes we do try to negotiate, plea deals before we indict. And it's just really hard to answer that question. It can take a really long time for cases.
Sure. If a university discovers possible misconduct and they handle it internally, is the institution still required to report this to NSF?
Yes, I believe if the university comes across any violations of rules or regulations that involve NSF, they're supposed to report that to our office.
Okay, and can you provide some examples of I guess, time and effort related issues that you discover?
Sure. So for time and effort related issues, well, in a recent case, I've seen individuals might be making up timesheets, so they're falsifying timesheets. So essentially, they're either they might have an employee that they say is working on the grant, but in fact, that employee is not working on the grant, has not been working on the grant. So we've seen, so in that case, right, I'm seeing timesheets that are just inaccurate. In that same situation, I'm seeing timesheets that have been backdated. So maybe work that was completed a year ago, they're filling out a timesheet today because they received an NSF request for proof of or to provide support for why these salary expenditures are the way they are. And the way we actually found this particular instance that I'm talking about was through, eventually we got these individuals' emails, and we were able to see emails that were right around the date that NSF OIG submitted a request for documentation. And we saw emails from one individual to another individual in the company with basically blank timesheets. So person A was emailing person B a blank timesheet and saying, please fill this out and return it to me. That person B, the employee, would fill it out, send it back to the person A, and then person A would send that over to our office. So that's one example. I mean, other examples can also be, I'm trying to think, maybe after an award is also closed, somebody might be trying to, again, just create falsified timesheets.
Right. So the next question comes from somebody who's writing from a nonprofit with their first NSF award and says, we will not hit the threshold that requires single audit, but is it recommended to do more in-depth audit besides their typical annual financial audit to ensure they're handling things correctly, especially since this is their first year?
I would say for that, it is important to get familiar with uniform guidance and regulations that are in addition to the federal the financial requirements for a regular financial audit. I don't know if you necessarily need to go to the extent of having a separate audit conducted, but you certainly need a process to ensure that you are meeting those requirements set out in the uniform guidance and that you are able to support your costs and ensure that they are reasonable and allocable to the award.
Okay, a question about one of the reasons we're doing this, or the only reason we're doing this event virtually, is because of COVID-19. And the question comes, has the COVID-19 pandemic brought any specific issues into focus, or is it perhaps too early to tell?
I would say for audits, COVID-19 has certainly impacted the length of the auditing time with the availability of the auditees and the documentation and certainly on-site visits and those type of things. So we are working with the auditees the best we can, and we're still getting through the process and ensuring that all the information is available that is needed. However, you know, we are being flexible, and we understand that these requirements, but, you know, they still need to be met, but the availability will have to be managed differently.
Okay, a question about documenting salary changes. So the question is a personnel action form to allocate the percent of effort sufficient documentation for salary changes, or is a time and effort certification required after the fact?
So I guess that question, if I'm understanding the question correctly, you're talking about, for example, an institution that has these personnel activity reports or forms. I think that's hard for me to answer. I don't know that I can give you a specific answer. I mean, I think what we really need is documentation that accurately proves that work was, you know, completed in line with the salary expenditures that were made. So in your situation, in this question, I guess if you're saying that, you know, this PI is supposed to work, you know, I don't know, 40% on project A and 40% on project B and 20% on project C, I think in order to make sure that the salaries is accurately appropriated, at some point the PI probably should be certifying that the time that he worked is correct. But that's, you know, I'm assuming an institution-specific question. And so as long as the institution can, you know, if presented with presented with a request for records, if the institution can provide supporting documentation that the time was accurate, the time work was accurate, then I think that might be fine. Sorry, I don't know that I answered that question very well, but yeah, sorry about that.
Okay, well, I would say, you know, if the questioner has more specific details and would like to contact you directly, they could do so with the information that you provided on the slide. Yeah. So, question: do you have examples that involve third-party cost sharing?
So I'm not sure if this question was specifically addressed to the audits or the investigations group. We did just complete an audit related to cost share. So while NSF does not participate a lot in cost shares, there are some of it, and we do look at those as well.
There are only a handful of programs that have mandatory cost sharing at NSF, and those are all identified on the Policy Office website. So if you wanted to know which programs those are, you can find those listed. There's maybe 5 to 6 or 7 of them at the most. May a PI sign expenditures on the grant, or may a delegated administrative manager sign as well?
So I guess that might be an investigation question. I think, you know, again, I don't think that I can't provide you with an answer for how your university should do that. But at the end of the day, what we're looking for is that the expenditures that are being submitted to NSF for reimbursement are accurate and truthful. And so if there's another individual that is able to accurately certify to that, then that would be the university or the institution's, you know, determination to make.
Let's see. We submit our expenses for time and effort as reimbursements, so it is based on actuals. Any issues with us handling it this way? We are a nonprofit, not a university.
Mm-hmm. So again, like I can't provide you with, you know, specific guidance or advice on how you should or shouldn't be handling something, but again, as I've said before, if you're able to accurately, you know, explain your expenses, then that's basically what we're looking for.
Okay, that looks like it is all of the questions that we have at the moment. I am putting, there was a question about the a link to the policy office page where we list the cost share program, the programs that have required cost sharing. I'm putting that right now into the chat so that you should be able to see that. We'll take one more question here. How do auditors look at nominal effort proposed for a large research project where the PI is not taking salary? This is disclosed in the facilities, equipment, and other resources section of the proposal, but only committed certified time is very nominal.
So I'm not aware of this particular situation. However, in general, any salary charges that are charged to the award, we do like to see that it was specifically incurred for the purposes of the project, the related project, and that if there is any allocation, that those hours were incurred for the award.
Okay, I want to thank you both, Jeanette and Sonia, for participating for the presentation and also answering questions live. And I want to thank all of you for participating today. I hope you'll be able to attend some of the other sessions that we have going on this week. In particular, tomorrow afternoon, there is a policy update session which you know, many of you may find very useful, so please do plan on attending that, either through the Zoom application or by live streaming it on YouTube. Again, thank you all for coming and participating, and please be well.